Hello, everybody. My name is Mr. Dowling. It's lovely to speak to you today. If you don't know who I am a TOK teacher and I've been making some YouTube videos for the past 2 years. I make some videos for English A and English B as well. But I normally focus on TOK, and I suppose the main videos I create are videos for the May essay titles. So I take each title and make a half-hour or so video for each one, really going into detail. Last year, I decided to make a longer video for the November essay titles. I just spent maybe 10 minutes on each one, offering some general thoughts. I thought no one would watch it, but quite a few people did watch it. I thank all of those people. I hope it was useful. And this year, I've actually had students and teachers get in touch asking, can I do another video for this year's November titles? So yeah, here it is. It's a bit long, but it'll be divided up into chapters. So hopefully you can find the information that you are looking for, or watch the whole video. That would be great. Even watch the whole video, and then maybe you get ideas for all the essay titles, and you can make a decision about which one you want to focus on. But I hope it's useful, no matter how you decide to watch it. So without further ado, here is my breakdown of the November 2023 TOK essay titles. So let us begin with essay title number 1. Are facts alone enough to prove a claim? Discuss with reference to any two areas of knowledge. I thought this was a straightforward question, but when I started to think about it, I quickly discovered that it is quite a difficult one. This is what I came up with. I began by thinking about the latter part of the question, to prove a claim. So what does that mean? Well, if we wish to prove a claim, we wish to show how that claim is undoubtedly true. And that means we need to ask ourselves, what is undoubtedly true? Well, you might want to think about your 4 truth checks if that is something you have studied in class. Coherence, correspondence, consensus, pragmatic. So if something is undoubtedly true, we should be able to apply those 4 truth checks. I think the overall point here is that a proven claim is much stronger than just any old idea, opinion, value, or belief. A proven claim is something that is undoubtedly true and is justified. So that's our starting point for this question. We now need to think about facts, and obviously this is a key part of this essay title. What are facts? Well, I think it would be interesting to start with some examples. So 2 plus 2 equals 4. Smoking increases the likelihood of cancer. Liverpool FC have won 6 Champions League titles. At the time of making this video, Manchester City have won 0. I was born on a Thursday. A dog is a 4-legged mammal. So what we have there are examples of things that I think most of us would agree are facts. And from these examples, we can maybe synthesize exactly what a fact is. I found some different definitions on the internet. A fact, something which can be proven to be the case. A fact is a statement about an actual thing that exists and can be proven true or false, observed or measured. A fact tells what actually happened, can be proven true or false. From all of that, I would say that a fact is the linguistic expression of something that we know to be true. So it's not the knowledge itself, it's how we express that we know that knowledge. So that is a definition of fact that we can proceed with. And I want to show you how we could maybe have a knowledge claim that a lot of people would say to be true, and how facts could be used to help prove that claim. So the knowledge claim I'm going to discuss here is the claim that Pluto is not a planet. Now, here are some facts that I think help us to address that claim. So Pluto is a dwarf planet. Its status was demoted by the International Astronomical Union in 2006. It only meets 2 out of the 3 criteria for being a planet. It does not meet the 3rd criteria of clearing the neighbourhood around its orbit. Its mass is substantially less than the combined mass of the other objects in its orbit, 0.07 times, in fact. What we have here is a knowledge claim. Pluto is not a planet. And we have 5 facts that help to justify that knowledge claim is actually true. It's a claim that can be proven. So facts can be very effective in proving a claim. But I think there are some problems with using facts in order to try and prove a claim. So let's take the same knowledge claim. Pluto is not a planet. And let's say I try to prove that claim with this fact. Pluto is a dwarf planet. That is a fact, but does it give us complete proof of what it is that we are trying to prove? You could say, well, a dwarf planet is still a kind of planet. It feels as though it's missing something. What happens if I throw another fact into the mix? So maybe I say Pluto is a dwarf planet. Paris is in France. Paris is in France. That is a fact. But that is a completely irrelevant fact. And it doesn't help us prove the claim that we are trying to prove. And then let's take this even further. So Pluto is not a planet. Pluto is a dwarf planet. Paris is in France. Pluto is a planet. At one time, that was fact. Before the conference where they decided that Pluto is no longer a planet, for many years it was accepted that Pluto is a planet. That was a fact. Children were taught it in school. This shows that something that might be a fact today might not be a fact tomorrow. And proof maybe needs to be timeless, universal, in order to actually perform its job properly. So again, just because we have facts, it's helpful, but it doesn't necessarily help us to prove a claim. Obviously dependent on what facts you use. So let's think now about this overall question. Are facts alone enough to prove a claim? Well, I would say there are arguments for yes and arguments for no. Yes, facts are already based on truth, which is a good starting point. They are a linguistic expression of what we know to be true. Those facts that we know to be true can directly connect to the claim in question if we select the most relevant facts. And facts can work with other facts to support a claim. So you could have 5 facts working together, and in combination, those facts do help to prove a claim. But you could also argue no, facts alone are not enough to prove a claim. some ideas for you. A fact on its own may not prove the totality of what it is we are trying to prove. The facts might not be totally relevant. The fact itself might be wrong. That's something to bear in mind. Maybe the facts need to function as part of a wider explanation. If we just start regurgitating facts without linking them together and putting them together as part of a wider explanation, those facts don't actually help us to prove the claim. They just sound like random nonsense. And this is something else to think about. Is it the fact itself that proves the claim? Or is it the process that goes into producing the fact? The fact itself is just a linguistic expression. It doesn't prove anything, perhaps. It's the process, the knowledge that lies behind the fact that actually proves the new knowledge claim that we are trying to prove. And by the way, I'm cringing as I'm looking at that last point because there are some grammar mistakes there. Have a think about what those grammar mistakes are. Moving on. So overall, in certain cases, facts alone, or certainly facts working with other facts, can help to prove a claim. But facts alone do not always prove a claim. Okay? So I think I've covered two sides of the argument there. It's obviously up to you to decide which side of the argument you believe is right. When you are thinking about that decision, there are several options available to you. Facts alone are enough to prove a claim. Facts are extremely useful, but facts alone don't prove a claim. Facts alone are meaningless and don't prove anything. Or maybe it's different for different types of knowledge. I don't know. Anyway, that is essay title number 1. Okay, so now we are going to move on to essay title number 2. If the mathematician's patterns, like the painters and the poets, must be beautiful, which is a quote by G.H. Hardy, how might this impact the production of knowledge? Discuss with reference to mathematics and the arts. So this is one of those questions that we see crop up time and time again, where there is a quote and we need to try and make sense of that quote and then essentially offer our own ideas about that quote in relation to the nature of knowledge. I think a key aspect of the quote here is this notion of what it is to be beautiful. What is beauty? And an interesting starting point here might be to look at aesthetic theories. These are the kind of things that you might study in a fine arts course. And I think they could be useful to us as we try and unpack this essay title. So, aesthetic theories. There are 5 main aesthetic theories that I came across in my research. The first one is imitationalism, which is artwork that is valued for how it realistically conveys real life. So if an artwork looks like real life, then that is deemed beautiful, according to this school of thought. Formalism. Artwork is valued for its effective organisation of the elements and principles of art. So this is following like the rules, the conventions of art. Also the technique involved. Emotionalism. Artwork is valued for its capacity to stir human emotions. I think that one is quite straightforward. Instrumentalism. Artwork is valued for how it plays prominently in today's world as art made for the purpose of influencing change within society. So this is about like the social message of the art. And institutionalism, artwork is valued by a community of individuals involved with creating, curating, collecting, selling, studying, and writing about artworks. So I think this refers to the discipline of the art itself and the people directly involved in that discipline, like the literary critics, the art critics, the artist, the main stakeholders, and how they value a piece of art. So those are some aesthetic theories that people may use to help make sense of this big question: what is beauty? And what I want to try and do is I want to try and see if we can apply these aesthetic theories to mathematics. So let's give this a shot. Imitationalism. So artwork is valued for how realistic it is. Well, isn't maths all about the underlying patterns that exist in the world around us? Formalism. Well, you could say that there's beauty in the step-by-step methodical approaches to problem solving that we see every day in mathematics. Emotionalism. Well, this doesn't really make me emotional, but there will be some people who are emotionally stirred by the symmetry of mathematics. The golden ratio is something you could look into. Actually, some people have tried to deconstruct beauty, and they say that these two things lie at the heart of what we deem to be beautiful. Instrumentalism, in terms of social impact, well, we use maths to understand the world, and then we use that knowledge to help us enact change. We apply that knowledge in different areas, like the sciences, for instance, to actually make a real difference. And you could also think about things like engineering as well. Institutionalism. So this is about the community of knowers, and it just reminds me of Andrew Wiles, the man who solved Fermat's last theorem. And there are several documentaries you can watch about that, and you can see how, one, he is very emotional about maths, and his maths in particular. He finds it incredibly beautiful, but also some of his peers, some of his colleagues talk about the beauty in mathematics. So what I've tried to do here is apply these aesthetic theories to maths to show how we could possibly say there is some beauty in mathematics. Now what I want to do is talk about beauty in art, which I hope is a little bit easier. So imitationalism, well, you might talk about the verisimilitude of art. So for example, kitchen sink drama, it's meant to replicate how people actually talk. You might have certain drawings that look exactly like the real thing. Imitationalists would appreciate that in art. Formalism. We have the rhyme schemes and the meter used in poetry. People being able to do that in an accomplished way to pull it off. That in itself could be deemed beautiful. Emotionalism. I mean, just think about something like Muncher's The Scream. How does that make you feel? Instrumentalism. Think about how hip hop has changed the world. There's actually a book about that. And institutionalism. For me, I was thinking about the literary canon, a list of books that certain people believe to be the best books, the books that you should read if you really want to appreciate literature. And you could really delve into that idea. And it's quite a controversial topic, but what we have is essentially a collection of books that certain prominent people believe are beautiful. So that's beauty in the arts. For this question, though, we're not just identifying beauty in maths and beauty in the arts. We need to think about the impact. What impact might it have? So it could have positive impact. A lot of things we would want from our knowledge are in line with the aesthetic theories that I have already outlined. For instance, we want knowledge to be in line with the real world. We want knowledge to be useful. We want knowledge to perhaps stimulate some kind of emotion. So we're not asking for anything drastic here. Essentially, beauty moves us in the right direction. And you could also say that beauty enhances enjoyment. That is surely a good thing. If people enjoy the subject, like maths, people are going to pursue maths more and more, and that could lead to benefits within the AOK, but also the world at large. But there are some negative aspects to think about, some negative impacts. If beauty is subjective, we could all just go down the route of producing only what is beautiful for ourselves. And that means you could have thousands, millions of different approaches to something. And that means that, I don't know, we're not working towards a unified version of the truth, which in itself could be problematic. And by pursuing beauty, are we maybe missing the point of what we are actually trying to achieve? So if a mathematician gets obsessed with creating a beautiful sequence of numbers, if the mathematician is obsessed with showing their working out in a beautiful way, are they perhaps moving away from the accuracy of mathematics, which is surely the most important thing? Also, you might even ask yourself this: does it even matter? Do mathematicians and artists care about beauty when producing their knowledge? You could argue that beauty is more important for the beholder, the viewer, the audience, the recipient, not the creator, him or herself. And maybe you could say that it has no impact whatsoever. Never mind positive or negative, it just has no impact. So overall, I would say that maybe you should define beauty in this essay. You should apply beauty to the two AOKs in question, and then you assess the impact. Does it exist? Is it good? Is it bad? And your overall thesis should be something along the lines of: it has a positive impact, it has a negative impact, it has no impact, or maybe it has different impacts in maths and the arts. But before I move on to the next essay title, there's something really notable here that I want to stress. If the mathematician's patterns, like the painters and the poets, must be beautiful, how might this impact the production of knowledge? I have underlined and coloured the phrase "like the painters and the poets" because I would argue that that is a parenthetic clause. It's surrounded by commas, and possibly you could take out that clause and the sentence makes sense. The mathematician's patterns must be beautiful. For me, this makes the whole question quite difficult because the mathematician's patterns might need to be beautiful, but just because the mathematician's patterns need to be beautiful doesn't mean that then has an impact on the arts. The grammar of this quote suggests to me that the arts will be impacted because the maths needs to be beautiful, and I just can't wrap my head around that. I think that is quite problematic. It makes this question quite complicated, and to be honest, I think I would just avoid this question. Anyway, that's all I want to say about essay title number 2. Essay title number 3, in the acquisition of knowledge, is following experts unquestioningly as dangerous as ignoring them completely. Discuss with reference to the human sciences and one other area of knowledge. Well, to begin with, I would like to think about experts. What is an expert? Well, I would say that experts are meant to be highly qualified, highly experienced people who are highly respected in their fields. I say meant to be. And as such, their knowledge is often trusted by other people who maybe don't have that expert knowledge in that particular field. And what I have here for you are some examples of experts. So on the far left, you have Harold Bloom, who passed away a couple of years ago. He was deemed an expert in literature. Sir Ian Kershaw, an expert in Nazi Germany. Terence Tao, the mathematician. I don't actually know too much about him, but according to my research, he is probably one of the most famous mathematicians in the world right now. Fauci, he is the expert who has guided America through the COVID pandemic. And Noam Chomsky, somebody who you could definitely talk about in relation to the human sciences. He's actually the most referenced living academic. He has lots of ideas about lots of different topics, ranging from linguistics to modern day politics. He is someone who would definitely be considered an expert. Notice, by the way, in general, these experts tend to be old white men. I know Tao is an exception, but maybe that reveals a problem with experts on the whole. I digress. So I want to talk about the pros of having these experts. Well, experts offer specialist knowledge. They offer great knowledge in their particular domain. So when I don't know something about a particular area or sub-area, an expert can help give me the information needed. And the expert allows us to benefit from what we might consider to be the best knowledge in that particular domain. We have to remember that these experts are experts for a reason. They wouldn't be experts otherwise, so they must have something to offer. And experts potentially have better access to knowledge through their connections, through the resources at their disposal. And that is another way in which they can benefit us. I have some examples of experts doing good here. So Chloe Zhao, that was a director who had great success a few years ago with Nomadland. She won many Oscars. When she went to film school, she studied under Spike Lee, someone who would be deemed to be an expert in film. And Chloe Zhao has said that she learned a lot from Lee. So who knows, maybe his expert advice helped Chloe Zhao in her formative years as a film director. You could make connections here to personal knowledge, shared knowledge, the dynamic zone of exchange. Another example, David Irving. This is a so-called expert who actually did something quite bad. He proposed that the Holocaust did not happen. What is interesting about this real life situation is that David Irving was taken to court, and other experts like Sir Ian Kershaw, who I mentioned earlier, actually stood against him and their expert knowledge led to the judge and the jury deeming David Irving's knowledge to be nonsense. And it just shows you that good experts can perhaps counter bad experts. Are there cons attached to experts? Well, certainly, yes. I mean, you need to ask yourself this: are all experts actually experts? It's quite worrying to think that anyone, especially in this day and age, can get onto the internet and make a podcast, create a YouTube channel like me, and pretend that they are an expert. And who decides who is an expert and who is not? What worries me is that politicians might decide who the experts are, and maybe they're just picking experts who support their agenda. Remember, experts are not superheroes. They are still human. They can still get things wrong. And if we focus too much on experts, the views of other people may be ignored, which is a great shame. Some real life situations here. Lysenko was an agricultural expert in the Soviet Union. He had some ideas about how to reform the food infrastructure, and it had disastrous consequences. You can look into that. Roy Meadow, this was a so-called expert who gave testimony in a case to do with cot death. He gave a particular statistic. A woman was put into jail based on that statistic, and it turned out that statistic was wrong, and the woman was subsequently released. But it shows you how, again, it can have bad consequences. You could look into that real life situation if it intrigues you. So we've talked about experts. I think what we need to do now is go back to the question: is following experts unquestioningly as dangerous as ignoring them completely? And I think the next part of the question we need to focus on is dangerous. So what is danger? Well, I think you could maybe think of a hierarchy of danger. For instance, at the bottom, I might be slightly upset because someone does not agree with me. Sorry, that should be does not agree with me. I might be slightly upset because someone does not agree with me. Maybe a bit more serious form of danger might be I might cut my knee. We're starting to get physical. Maybe you could say I might die. That is a much more extreme form of danger. And what is the ultimate form of danger? Well, I would say it's the complete and utter annihilation of the planet. All human beings are eliminated. And I think it's worthwhile thinking about that ultimate danger as we consider this question. So, can following experts unquestioningly lead to the ultimate form of danger? If we follow experts and we don't ever question them, could that lead to the total annihilation of the planet and the human race? Conversely, can ignoring experts completely lead to the ultimate form of danger? So if we ignored experts, could that lead to the complete and utter annihilation of the planet and all human beings? I think what you need to do is you need to ask yourself those questions. And maybe if following experts unquestioningly could lead to the ultimate form of danger, and ignoring experts completely could not lead to the ultimate form of danger, then the answer for your essay is there for you. Maybe what you might say is we can't be certain that one of them is going to lead to the ultimate form of danger, but maybe one is more likely than the other. I don't have the answers here, by the way. It's up to you to come up with the answers. I'm just inviting you to consider these questions. But something I would say is that it's all well and good dealing in hypotheticals. For instance, in a hypothetical situation, ignoring experts completely could lead to the total annihilation of the planet. However, for us to make our claims strong, we need to ask ourselves, do we have any real world justifications for those claims? So think about these questions, but then see if you can find real life examples to support your overall argument. By the way, if dealing with the hypothetical leads you nowhere, maybe you need to ignore this hierarchy that I proposed earlier, and maybe you need to come up with your own system for thinking about danger. Okay, so overall, who are experts and what kind of knowledge do they offer? What are the pros and cons of trusting experts? And how do we work out what is more dangerous, following or ignoring? I hope that I have tapped into each of those questions over the last 10 minutes or so. When it comes to you actually writing your essay, you have 3 choices, I would say. Following experts unquestioningly is equally as dangerous as ignoring them completely. Following experts unquestioningly is less dangerous than ignoring them completely, or following experts unquestioningly is more dangerous than ignoring them completely. That is essay title number 3. Essay title number 4. Is it problematic that knowledge is so often shaped by the values of those who produce it? Discuss with reference to any 2 areas of knowledge. Well, a starting point here would be values, and I found this on the internet. You're not going to be able to see it clearly here, but that's kind of the point I want to make. There are so many different core values that we have as individuals, let alone values that we have as societies, as communities. As I say, you can't see those values clearly here, but I have provided the link so you can find out more if you are interested. Now, look, there are so many values that we might have, and people might say we can use something like critical thinking to be more objective and to eliminate those values from affecting the ways in which we shape knowledge. But I would argue that is completely incorrect. I think critical thinking can be a valuable tool, but it's never going to eliminate our values completely. I think our values are always going to affect the knowledge that we produce. It's going to shape that knowledge. So with that in mind, how is knowledge shaped by the values of those who produce it? How could we maybe see this across all of the areas of knowledge? Well, think about the arts. You could think about the artwork itself. So the values that the author puts into the work, but also the response to the artwork as well. So the audience is going to have their own values, and they are going to attach those values, integrate those values into their interpretation of the artwork. So values seem to be quite prominent in the production of the artwork and also the production of our response to the artwork. Think about history. I would say that history is a form of storytelling, so it's a bit like art as well. And what we do is we tell stories that support the values that we uphold. So let's say, for example, one of our values is patriotism, loving one's country. Well, obviously the history that you put forward, the version of history that you put forward, could be used to shape, could be used to support your value, but also the value could affect the knowledge as well. So maybe the stories we are telling are influenced by the values. It's just an endless cycle. Mathematics and natural sciences, I would say, are quite similar. Maybe these are the most objective AOKs, but they value that objectivity. They value that accuracy, and that is a form of value as well. And human sciences, a little similar to maths and the natural sciences, but I would say a lot of its values tend to be tied to particular theories, and you could almost argue that those theories become values in their own way. So the way I see it, you cannot escape the fact that knowledge is shaped by the values of those who produce it. The big question, however, is this: is it problematic? And when we're thinking about this word problematic, I think we should look at it from two different lenses. So first of all, something can be practically problematic, but also something can be ethically problematic. And I'm going to discuss these two forms of problematic in a bit more detail. So practical problems. If knowledge is shaped by the values of those who produce it, well, that could mean that the knowledge is biased. And bias is not always a bad thing, but sometimes the knowledge could be so biased that the knowledge is actually wrong. And that's when it can potentially become a big issue. Biased wrong knowledge could become the foundation for further biased wrong knowledge. And it's just this never-ending line of biased wrong knowledge that all stems from the fact that the knowledge was initially shaped by the values of the person who produced it. So there are definitely practical problems to having values influence the production of knowledge in this way. There are also ethical problems. And I was listening to a podcast recently which was about cancel culture. And it talked about this word problematic and said that it's now got a new meaning in the context of cancel culture. So we might look at a TV series from the 1970s and say that its representations of women are problematic, for instance. What I'm trying to get at here is something that is a problem because it is morally corrupt. So what happens when morally corrupt values shape knowledge? And I put morally corrupt in quotation marks because obviously that is subjective. Different people are going to have different ideas about what is morally corrupt. But if something is morally corrupt, what happens when those values shape knowledge? What are the consequences of that? Could it be the case that we have already been negatively influenced by such values? And if so, will this continue into the future? And should such values even be given a chance to shape the knowledge? So if we can say that morally corrupt values are causing negative consequences for our knowledge, then maybe we need to think about how we can have a more systematic approach to moving away from these values, and what that approach might look like. But in itself, that is practically problematic. Maybe ethically, who knows? Maybe you could say it is not problematic. This would be a different spin on the question. So you could say that biased wrong knowledge, if it exists, can be held to account, because let's face it, we can produce competing knowledge, and what will happen is the truth will ultimately prevail. So it doesn't matter if my knowledge is negatively influenced by my values, because somebody else might have slightly more objective knowledge, and maybe their idea might triumph. So there's this hope that the truth will ultimately prevail no matter what. Therefore, it's not a problem. And maybe it could be said that there is nothing ethically problematic about freedom of thought and free speech. Okay, yes, people might produce knowledge that is shaped by their values, and that knowledge could be bad. It could be morally corrupt. But wouldn't it be more morally corrupt if we imposed limitations on what people could think, what people could say? That is one way of looking at this. So overall, values inevitably shape knowledge. I don't think we can get away from that. This could potentially pose practical and ethical problems. However, maybe these problems are not even problems. So please remember that. How to tackle the essay? I think you have three options. You could say, yes, it is problematic. No, it is not problematic. Or the answer lies somewhere in the middle. But I think you need to think about those three options and choose one of them for your overall thesis in your essay. Thank you for listening to my little talk there about essay title number 4. We are nearly at the end now. This is essay title number 5. It is always the case that the world isn't just the way it is how we understand it. And in understanding something, we bring something to it, which is a quote adapted from The Life of Pi, discussed with reference to history and the natural sciences. At first, I hated this question because I thought the quote is a little bit convoluted, a little bit confusing. But I do think this is a question that allows you to engage with a lot of philosophical ideas if that is something you are interested in. And it does specify the AOKs, history and the natural sciences, so that perhaps makes our job a little easier. Right, I hope you are ready, because I'm now going to give you a little whistle-stop tour about the philosophy of reality. So, I think a typical starting point for many normal people around the world is that there is an actual material world around us. I think for your common man on the street, that is not really questioned. If we dig a little bit, if we go into this a little bit deeper, maybe you could say that aspects of our reality are ontologically independent of our conceptual schemes, perceptions, beliefs, etc. So essentially, what we think is real, what seems to be real around us, is actually real. So if there's a table in front of you, that is an actual table that does actually exist, which maybe seems to be a default way of thinking. It seems to be the easiest way to make sense of the world. But of course, philosophers over the years have proposed different theories, and maybe reality is not what it seems. So think about something like Plato's analogy of the cave. Ultimately, the reality that we view is based on what we can perceive, and our perception might have limitations that are imposed upon us. Therefore, what we see is an illusion of reality, not the exact truth. George Berkeley, he had some interesting ideas. He said, doth the reality of sensible things consist in being perceived, or is it something distinct from their being perceived, and that bears no relation to the mind? So he asked this question, are things that we think to be real actually real? Upon reflection, Berkeley said that they're not real. He said that the things around us are just like data, just particles that have been sent down by God, and then through some mysterious means we construct these objects, these things in our mind, which is quite a strange thing to think about. Immanuel Kant, he mentioned the distinction between the noumenal material world and the phenomenal mental world. So he said that is this noumenal world that is real, but also unknowable. And what we do is we make sense of that world, or we try to make sense of that world in our heads. We try to understand it. And it's only that world that exists in our heads, our perception of it, our interpretation of it, that phenomenon that we have created, that exists. So again, Kant would argue that maybe the world is not as it seems. John Baudrillard, a postmodernist, he said we live in a world where there is more and more information and less meaning. So look at the example of a natural sponge. Maybe we are more used to seeing it in a neater manufactured form. That neater manufactured form might be drawn in some two-dimensional way, and then maybe that two-dimensional form that has the absence of basic reality is used to create something else that has no relation to reality whatsoever. And a postmodernist like Baudrillard would say that the more we go down this path, the further removed from reality we actually find ourselves. And because we live in a world that has media all around us, we are very much removed from reality. And then you've obviously got the idea of skepticism. So think about Zhuangzi. He said that he had a dream one day that he was a butterfly, but then when he woke up, he couldn't decide whether he was dreaming about being a butterfly or was the butterfly dreaming about being him. So we have to question our whole reality. Who knows? We could just end up being some kind of brain in a vat. And if all of this is getting too much for you, and you can't quite understand, maybe think about something like The Matrix, which I think does a good job of illustrating this idea that the world is not as it seems. And another great example here, Everything Everywhere All at Once. I love this movie. You've got all of these parallel universes, and again, that goes against what we think we know about the world. Maybe reality is very much different from what we think it to be. There are endless possibilities. So I want you to think about all of those things I've just talked about and see if you can apply it to the AOKs that we need to discuss. So history. Well, in history, I'd say that we can never actually know the truth. We'll never know exactly what the world is like. I think it's not the way we see it. Because think about it, history is the quest to find out what happened in the past, and that is a very futile quest. We can never actually know exactly what happened in the past. The only way we could do that is if we built some kind of time machine, but then even that would have its problems, like where do we go to, when do we go to? So we can never actually know the truth. Instead, in the AOK of history, our knowledge is based on primary sources, but those are subjective, perhaps. And also, our knowledge is based on the secondary sources that are based on the primary sources. All the while here, what we are doing is we're adding our own perspectives, values, ideas, beliefs, opinions. So the more we perhaps investigate history, maybe we're getting further and further away from the truth. Maybe the history of the world is not as it seems. For this essay title, you need to think about the other aspect of the prompt, which is what are we bringing to the world? Are we bringing something to the world or the things that we try to understand? And I think that in history, the case could be made to say that we do. I think that by adding our own perspectives, values, ideas, beliefs, opinions along the way, we are essentially making it more colourful. We are making it a bit more entertaining in a way. We are bringing it to life. And what we also do is we make connections to other periods of history. And we draw out themes too, like themes of continuity and change. And what we might do is we might bring our own agenda to the history. We might use the history to support our own agenda. And the last thing I would say about history here is the idea that all history is contemporary history, an idea proposed by Crochet. This is the idea that whatever we say about the past is influenced by what is happening in our own lifetimes. So the way we look at the Industrial Revolution in 2023 is very much different from what somebody might have said about the Industrial Revolution in 1950. So again, that is another way in which we're bringing something to the table. Natural sciences, again, I don't think we can ever know the truth. As much as people might think that the natural sciences is close to the truth or is the truth, that's not really the case. What the natural sciences is doing is getting closer and closer to the truth, but it's not there yet, and indeed it might never be, because bear in mind, our knowledge is based on what we are currently able to observe, and there are going to be limitations in terms of what we can observe, whether that's due to a lack of knowledge development or even a lack of technological development. What we do in the natural sciences is we interpret, we generalize, and we make conjectures based on what we know. And when we use these terms like interpret, generalize, and conjecture, what we need to acknowledge is that there is an element of subjectivity in the natural sciences. It's not always objective, even though it tries to be. Again, we need to ask ourselves the question, what are we bringing to it? What are we bringing to our knowledge when we understand things in our own way? Well, one thing we do is we simplify, and I put that in quotation marks because what I'm saying here is there is some very complex things in nature. And what we do in science is we simplify it by expressing it as maybe a theory, or perhaps simplify it by using data. I don't want to dismiss science as something that is just an oversimplification, because those simplifications themselves might be quite complex. I'm just saying that what we're doing is we're bringing the knowledge down from the gods, so to speak, and we're making it much more human, something that everyone can understand. So we're taking the mysteries of the universe and we're presenting it, or we're theorizing about it in a human language. Another thing we do is we accumulate knowledge. One scientific finding leads to another. Based on what we know, we predict. So we can predict what might happen in the future. We make plans for the future. And also another thing we do is we confirm. So we test our hypotheses, and that's a good thing. But also bear in mind, it could be a bad thing. You might want to think about confirmation bias. I'm going on a bit longer for this essay title because it is quite a big one that needs to be unpacked. Bear in mind that there are so many aspects of that quote that there are going to be different ways of tackling it. So you might say that yes, the world isn't as it is. It is how we understand it. And yes, in understanding something, we bring something to it. But maybe you say that one part of the quote is correct and the other side is not. Or maybe you might say that both sides of the quote are incorrect. So what I've tried to offer in this slide are some ideas for how you could maybe approach this in alternative ways. I haven't got time to read my ideas out here, but have a quick look at those ideas that are on the screen, and who knows, they might lead you to your own ideas. I hope they do. So overall, some say the world is the way it is, but I think many philosophers would argue the opposite. What we then need to do is think about this idea of our own understanding and ask ourselves, what does our understanding bring to history? What does our understanding bring to the natural sciences? And there are different ways of tackling this essay. There are two parts to the quote. So you could say yes, 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 no, no, yes, no, no. And that is essay title number 5. And finally, we are on to essay title number 6. Faced with a vast amount of information, how do we select what is significant for the acquisition of knowledge? Discuss with reference to the natural sciences and one other area of knowledge. I think this is quite an easy essay title. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. So yeah, I mean, I think everyone could write something about this. I think the ideas that you could cover are fairly obvious, but maybe that might put you at a disadvantage as well, because maybe you're not challenging yourself appropriately. Maybe you might not have an opportunity to demonstrate some original thinking, some advanced ideas. So that's something you need to consider. But I'm not going to tell you what to do regarding this essay title, and I don't think anyone else should either. But how can we make decisions about the information we are confronted with? Well, what we might do is we might think about provenance, which is the origin of the information. This is something that historians do all the time, but it's something that we can apply to other AOKs as well. So we're asking ourselves some basic questions. Who produced the information? What is the information? When was it produced? Where was it produced? Why was it produced? And how was it produced? What processes were involved? And by asking ourselves these basic questions about provenance, we can determine whether the information is reliable or not, whether the information is useful or not. Okay, so that's the first method I would like to cover. The second thing we could do is think about who or what even is carrying the information. So the information has been produced, but then how is it shared? Now, I don't know about you, but I would probably be less inclined to trust something produced by BuzzFeed than I would something produced by a reputable newspaper like the New York Times. And by extension, I think I would be most likely to trust something that appears in an academic journal that has been peer reviewed. So I would argue that the way in which the knowledge is shared, who is carrying the knowledge, can help us to decide what kind of information is most significant, more significant. Another thing we can do is we can apply the truth checks. I talked about these truth checks briefly in the section on essay title 1, but you have the idea of coherence, like does it all fit, does it all make sense? Correspondence, does it fit with the world around us as we know it? Consensus, do most people believe this to be true? And also pragmatic, what practical benefit does it have? Using the truth checks can help us to identify what is significant. Also, when we are selecting what is significant, we might think about the overall reception to that knowledge. So how do people generally feel about it? A bit like the consensus truth check. But also you could talk about, has it won any awards? If it's a book, for instance. You could also think about how experts regard that knowledge. All of these things could have an impact on what knowledge we select and what knowledge we choose not to select when we are going through the process of the acquisition of knowledge. And also, let's not neglect preference, because let's face it, not everything needs to be hard, objective truth. We don't always need to be looking for things that we can hold to rigorous academic standards. Especially in the arts, we might be inclined to just select what we like or what we feel like selecting at that particular moment in time. So that is another way of making such a decision that I think has value in its own right. And maybe we could deliberately choose, or maybe we don't deliberately choose, maybe we choose it subconsciously to have a passive approach. And this is something that we're seeing a lot of with the advent of technology. So a lot of the time, maybe we're letting Google do it for us. We're typing something into a search engine. Google says, oh, well, this is the best link, the top one, and we click on it and we select that information. And then you could also tie this into the idea of algorithms. Maybe the algorithm is telling us, the underlying algorithms of Google and other websites is telling us what information we select. Maybe the algorithm is making the choice for us, even though we think we are making the choice. It reminds me very much of the Social Dilemma documentary here. Maybe some connections could be made to the Cambridge Analytica scandal as well. So overall, how do we select what is significant for the acquisition of knowledge? I think we can look at provenance. We can ask ourselves who carries the information. We can apply truth checks. We can think about reception. We can consider our own preferences, and maybe we might even choose or subconsciously choose to take a passive approach. whatever you decide, when you're tackling the essay, you've got to remember that it is a how question. And because it is a how question, we need to be focusing on possible methods that we use when selecting what is significant for the acquisition of knowledge. And that is all I have to say about the sixth and final essay title. Hey! If you watched the whole hour of that video, well done, well done. That was a hard slog, but yeah, the main thing is it's just a sharing of ideas, and I hope there's something in there that you find useful. Remember, don't just take my words for granted. You need to come up with your own ideas. Maybe just use some of my ideas as a starting point. And you know, my ideas might not be any good. It's just my personal opinions on these essay titles. So please, please, please think about it independently. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope it was useful. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, please tell people about it. Have a look at some of my other videos, because there are some there that might be relevant to your other subjects, or maybe some things that might help you in TOK. But yeah, thank you very much. Take care. Goodbye.